Welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, brought to you by TournamentPokerEdge.com, the only podcast dedicated exclusively to poker tournament strategy. Now here's your host, Clayton Fletcher.
Hello once again, everybody, and welcome to the Tournament Poker Edge podcast, sponsored by ACR Poker, where this Sunday, it's all going down, guys. August 18th, we've got, of course, our TPE free roll. That's $1,000 free roll. It happens at 6 p.m. Eastern time. But also, this coming Sunday is your last chance to enter the $8 million guaranteed Venom Mystery Bounty, as well as the $2 million guaranteed Venom PLO. It's all going down on ACR Poker, which, if you're not yet playing on ACR, I have a great deal for you. Click the link in the description of this podcast, and you can receive a first-time deposit bonus, 100% up to $2,000 just by clicking that link and then entering the promo code TPE. My name is Clayton Fletcher, and I am in Tannersville, Pennsylvania, on a bit of a family road trip, if you will, visiting people and just kind of enjoying the summer. Going to be doing some water slides this weekend. I'm so happy to be bringing you yet another edition of this longest running poker strategy podcast of all time. And I'm not alone. Joining me via Skype is a first-time guest, an accomplished player, recently having tremendous success. He reached out over Twitter and told me that he gives me and the site and the podcast some of the credit for his success, and we'll take it. So joining us today via Skype from Charlotte, North Carolina, first-time guest, Brent Lee. Brent, how are you doing, sir?
Doing good, Clayton. As you said, long-time listener, first-time caller. Currently live in Charlotte, but actually right now I'm up in D.C. I'm at the Potomac Summer Poker Open up at the MGM National Harbor. So at the moment I'm up in D.C.
Yeah, I have family out that way too. Sometimes when I do the podcast, I tell everyone that I'm in Maryland. I'll be there in a few weeks, and I might hit up National Harbor during my trip. I tend to either go to Maryland Live or National Harbor. So what are you, just a road warrior these days? Are you following the circuit around the country or what?
Man, long story short, so, I played a little bit of poker back in college and kind of got out of it when had two young children and kind of drifted away. During COVID, like a lot of us, I was going absolutely stir crazy, to which my wife said, baby, you got to find a hobby or something to get you out of the house. Couldn't really meet with people, so I started searching online, trying to see if, what the online poker scene was looking like, and listening to podcasts, and tripped across you guys. It wasn't you originally, it was the original Big Dog Pocket Fives and Mark and and Killing Bird, and started listening to it, man, and it relit the fire. Just absolutely missed playing. It got me back into it. And when COVID kind of started going away, I said, you know what, I'm going to get out there and start playing. I started playing local home games, local card clubs. And then about a year and a half ago, I guess it was February of 23, I heard that the circuit event was coming to Cherokee, which is my closest casino up in Nashville, North Carolina area, and said, you know what, I'm going to make a trip up there and see how I do with some of my newfound knowledge from the TPE website and listening to the podcast, and did pretty well. Cashed in half the events I played, enough to basically pay for my weekend. And since then, it's kind of been dedicating one week a month, traveling the circuit, Tunica, Choctaw, obviously Cherokee, Pompano Beach, and did some WPT tournaments down in Seminole. And then this past summer was my first summer playing the big show out in Vegas, the summer camp, as we like to call it, and had some amazing success there. And you're absolutely right. I do feel like I owe a lot of that success to listening to you guys during COVID and kind of absorbing a lot of that information.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm looking at your Hendon Mob results, and in the less than the last year, you've already had something like 20 some odd cashes. places like Chicago. That's the circuit events out there. You've gone to Tunica. You went back to Chicago, and of course, I guess your home casino, as it were, is probably the one out there in Cherokee, which I've only ever visited once, but I intend to come back soon. Obviously, your biggest score, you've got over 300,000 in lifetime earnings, but almost all of that actually comes from your second place finish this past July at the WSOP in the $800 Independence Day celebration. I mean, you talk about somebody making a splash in his first ever World Series. Tell us what that was like, making that final table your first time out in Vegas.
It was mind blowing. As a father of two young children and also still working a W-2 job, I unfortunately was not able to go out for the entire summer like a lot of people. So I kind of had to look at the schedule and say, okay, what's 1 week I can go out? And obviously with the July 4th holiday falling when it did, I had a vacation off of work, and I said, I'll pick this one. I'll go out, I'll play the Colossus, I'll play the Independence Day and maybe some of the PLO events, and I'll just kind of see how it goes. Colossus, I did cash in the Colossus, min cash, and that gave me a little bit of confidence. And then I decided to buy in the Independence Day. Did play day one of the Independence Day, and I cashed but did not bag. And I contemplated just saying, okay, well, I played 2 tournaments and I cashed in 2 tournaments, and that's great. And I said, you know what, I'm going to parlay that cash no bag, and I'm just going to buy into day 2. And bought into day 2 and ended day 2 up near the chip leaders. And going into day 2, incredibly anxious, but I'd made a deal with my wife before. We'd had conversations, and she said, how come you've never really won anything? I tried to explain to her that it doesn't work that way in tournament poker, that it's sort of like, playing golf. You don't see the same guy winning the golf tournament every single, but you just need to make the cut. And so I asked her, said, what would you consider a successful trip? At which point will you start giving me a hard time about not winning something? She said, well, if you could come home with, let's say, $30,000, which at the time seemed like a pretty big number. And so I remember texting her on day 2, and I said, well, I'm 14,000 guaranteed. And then, okay, I'm 25,000 guaranteed. And then when I finally made the 30, I said, okay, you can leave me alone now. And then it just kept going. And then it was 50,000, and then it was 70,000. And to be honest, when we hit the final table, it all just kind of shut down on me. I've been doing some work with the Prime Mind crew, Elliot's group.
Yeah. And
it's been doing some work with them. And so I had a call with Adrian Carter, who's my mental coach. And she talked me through, we did about a 30-minute Prime session, and went into the final table and just in kind of Zen mode, and till we got down to heads up. Heads up is when I kind of lost the focus a little bit. But even when we finished and I came in second place, I walked from the table and, walked over to a couple guys that are friends of mine that were railing me. And I said, well, I guess my wife's going to be happy. 100K score. They said, 100K? What are you talking about? You just did over 300. And to be honest, I wasn't even looking at the ladder board to ICM or anything. I didn't even realize that second place was that strong. But yeah, a great first time out in Vegas. Obviously a great bankroll builder has increased my confidence to play more events, and I'm going to kind of see where it takes me next.
Wow. And so you're in DC now. And so what are you planning on playing this weekend?
So I'm going to be playing the $1 million qualifier that's coming up this weekend. It's sort of like the intro event. They call it the multi-flight, sort of like their version of a mini main.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be buying into the day 1E of that tomorrow, and then winning my way there. And then I'm going to be playing there's a couple other events. There's the Monumental Stacks. And just like I said earlier, I'm not planning on staying up here for the whole series unless something significant were to happen, in which case I would reconsider extending to their version of the main.
Well, it's great to talk to someone who is on an upswing. My listeners know I've been on a bit of a downswing lately. My World Series was god-awful, and, it's been tough. But I've been playing poker for quite a long time, and I know that I've just got to play my way through it, keep doing my best, try to get into that Zen state that you mentioned. And the Elliot that you mentioned, if anyone doesn't know, that's Elliot Rowe. He's been a guest here on the podcast a while back. I believe during COVID we spoke with Elliot, and he's a good friend of ours. So I'm glad to hear that you're working with him. What is that mental preparation like, and how do you think it affects your ability to focus at the table?
So he does offer poker mental coaching. That's one-on-one. I don't work with Elliot himself, as I did mention. I work with Adrian Carter. Yeah, she's a Talon Chick is her online X name. So I work with her with one-on-one coaching, and it sort of removes the barriers and makes sure that you can remain focused in the moment. That's been fantastic. And then also Elliot just launched something called the Prime Mind app. It's a monthly subscription service, but has primers, and it's not just for poker. It's also an app that's used for Olympic athletes or stock traders or just anyone that is trying to reach high performance mental state. And so that's an app that I use. I listen to a 10-15 minute primer before going into a tournament. When I go really deep into a tournament, when we're on dinner break or something like that, I'll find a quiet corner, listen to another 15-minute primer. And as a matter of fact, when I was toward the final few tables in the Independence Day where I went really, really deep, I just had one of Elliot's primers on loop. I turned the volume down where I could still kind of pick up what he was saying, but it wasn't interrupting my thought process, and definitely had a calming effect and just helped me stay focused.
Yeah, I mean, staying focused is so important. The deeper you get into a tournament, the more important it becomes to stay focused, because that's where the real money is, right? So you ended up getting second place, which is a pretty good ROI for an $800 buy-in. And more importantly, got your wife off your back a little bit, it sounds like. So congrats on all of your recent success. I know you have a hand or two that we can go through, but you mentioned before we started recording that something's been coming up a lot that you wanted to run by me. So what was that about?
Yeah, so, on a bit of a heater right now. So I came off of that second place finish, immediately went into WSOP circuit, and I scored my first ring. So I got punched my ticket in the Tournament of Champions, which is going to be good coming up next year. Hopefully they reconsider moving it out of the Commerce. But the spot that I found myself in and gave me a lot of trouble, specifically in that tournament, is when coming up against what I would call a mediocre ace out of position. So if you're looking at something like a low jack position, maybe a middle position, and you bump up against something like an ace-9 suited. So I've got a specific hand related to that, but just in general, that's a hand that I would typically raise and open to raise, or if there's been a open raise before, under the gun 1, something along those lines, maybe that just becomes a flat. And then when the flop comes, one of two things. Either when I get, let's say, ace-7-4, so I've got top pair weak kicker, or if something like a jack-9-3 rainbow were to come out, so I have middle pair top kicker, but I'm out of position to a later caller. So if I'm either opening in low jack position and I get a call from the button, or if there's a previous open I flat and then I get the button behind, that on those specific flops I kind of freeze.
Okay, so we're talking about an ace rag or an ace with a medium kicker, like you said, specifically ace-9. So from what positions do you think we should be generally opening a hand like ace-9?
Well, typically, ace-9 into an open raise unsuited is something I probably would just let it go. But if it's ace-9, let's say ace-9 of diamonds, that's something where I want to see a flop just to see, what can be working. We've got some nice straight opportunities. We got obviously the nut flush opportunity. So I feel like I want to see the flop. I probably wouldn't. Ace-9 suited, I would say middle position, well, probably low jack, high jack cutoff, obviously button. But the earliest I would probably consider opening that would be the low jack position. I'm more likely to flat that to a earlier open, but I would need to flop strong in order to continue.
Right. Okay. So now you guys know, before we get into like the theory behind this question, you guys know that I've been singing the praises of GTO Wizard here on the podcast for months now. I'm a huge fan of this tool. I find it incredibly helpful. It will help you to learn from artificial intelligence, exactly how to answer a question like the one Brent is asking here, at least from a theoretical standpoint. I'm obsessed with GTO Wizard. You guys can check it out if you want. There's a link in the description. You can get 24 hours unlimited access of all of GTO Wizard's features. You can study, you can practice, you can plug in your hands that you played online or virtually any spot, especially with the new update that we've been talking about here on the podcast, where now they've actually made adjustments where you can plug in whether you're playing a PKO or even a mystery bounty or any other type of tournament, a satellite, whatever the case may be. And of course, all those different variables will affect our ranges. So click that description, get your 24 hours of unlimited access to GTO Wizard. And then after that trial period is over, you guys can save 10% by using that affiliate link that we have in the description. Now, no matter what GTO Wizard has to say about all this, Brent, I would caution against doing too much flatting with medium strength hands in general. Many times these hands will actually play better as a 3-bet or fold. So there's nothing wrong. Like if I'm in the low jack and middle position opens and I look down like at a suited ace-8 or ace-9, even if the wizard says I should be calling, I don't think you're really giving up that much by just throwing that one away, And if you want to play it, I don't think there's anything wrong with having it as a 3-bet some of the time. And I think that will do a few things for you. Number one, it can quote unquote buy position for us, right? So if I end up 3-betting from the low jack, I'm much less likely to get action in position on my left, right? Because my 3-bet is going to discourage players who might otherwise have entered the pot from doing so. So that's one thing it does for us. And also it kind of helps us to define exactly how strong that original opener's range is. So my first recommendation is that you should consider 3-betting or folding these hands and not maybe flatting with them so much. The problem with flatting, I think, is exactly the problem that you seem to be running into lately, which is that you are maybe flopping an ace and trying to figure out where you stand. You're just kind of getting in trouble playing against strong players who have position on you, and now you have some piece of the flop, and it's hard to tell where you are. So kind of generally being more aggressive with it might help you eliminate some of those problems. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely hear that. It tends to be either, you flop the world or you get yourself in trouble. As you have frequently said on the website, win a little pot or lose a big pot.
Yeah, that's a problem, right?
Yeah, and certainly don't want to get yourself in the situation. It feels as though, and as you said, I've actually been working a little bit with Andrew Brokus on some of the GTO concepts. And as you said, we can't always take what the wizards say as gospel, right? And frequently they say, oh, well, it's a mix. Sometimes you're doing this and sometimes you're doing that. And you're like, okay, great. That doesn't help me very much. Other than maybe looking at my watch, and if it's an odd number, I do one thing. And if it's even, I do the other. So, yeah, I definitely agree that maybe throwing in a small, a 3x over raise, especially if there's already been an opener, or when I do get the open, that more frequently is if I'm in the hijack position, I look down at ace-9, I throw in a 2.2, 2.5 pre-flop raise, and then I get either a light 3-bet from the button or sometimes just a flat from the button. Obviously, light 3-bet, plenty of equity with the suited ace-9, so tend to call. Or when I get the flatter behind, then all of a sudden we're going to the flop. And then as I hit that aforementioned either ace rag or something like a 1 over, I pair my lower card and then a rag below rainbow. That's the spot that I find myself out of position with a medium hand. And find myself being taken advantage of more frequently than not.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough spot. It's a tough spot. You can't really fold to that 3-bet, especially if you're relatively deep. We do need to go ahead and see the flop. Otherwise, you're just going to get 3-bet off of so many hands.
Exactly.
You're very easily exploited that way. One thing that may help here with approaching this strategically, and that I've learned specifically from GTO Wizard, is that very, very often when we raise and get called by a player who has position on us, we should check to that player. I'm not talking about a 3-better now. I'm talking about if you open 2.2, 2.5, whatever you do, and the button calls you, whether you hit that flop or not, very often the wizard will just check. So in other words, the C-betting frequency from out of position is much lower than that of in position.
Okay, and I know you always tout the GTO explanation that anytime you're not the pre-flop aggressor, you should always check in a heads-up situation. So what I hear you saying is that even if it's just a flat behind, you should still consider checking because you're viewing that almost as kind of like a semi-aggression.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure, to be honest, what the full explanation is. But even if whether you flop an overpair or a set or the nuts, or you flop nothing, we just want to be checking to that in position player in these situations often because it makes us harder to beat. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to bet our good hands and check our bad hands, right? Yeah. So, just checking everything is going to help with that a lot. And then that will exploit players who will see that check as weakness, because although sometimes it will be weakness, if you always check there, then he won't really know for sure whether it's weakness this time or not. And as you mentioned, because you have so much equity, you're going to hit a lot of flops with a hand like ace-9 suited. And, if he just decides to fire because you check, now you can go check raise, you can go check call, even looking to peel. Like if you flop, say it comes something like 8-6 deuce with 1 diamond, and you have the ace-9 of diamonds. We can check call that. We can even check raise that sometimes.
Looking at the backdoor equity for the diamonds.
Yeah, and you've got the overcards, the backdoor straight, backdoor flush, right? You've got a lot going on. And so he might just say, well, Brent is checking, so I can fire at this and take it down, and then be surprised when you check raise or check call him. So
then you're looking at the hand development on the turn to determine whether or not we're going to be considering this a bluff catcher or whether we're going to be gaining equity and stay with the thin value.
Right. Now, if your opponent does decide to bet having been checked to in position, your call gives him a lot more information than he had before. So now you guys both have more information. And so now, depending on what comes on the turn, if you check again, his bet on the turn means a lot more to me than his bet on the flop does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, because he's recognizing my call as that I've got a piece of it at least, because I wouldn't be pure floating.
You've now strengthened your range. So if he keeps on betting, more often than not, he's going to have a very good hand, right? Yeah. Because he's not going for pot control unless he's playing the check behind on the river, which some people do. But yeah, that's, just obviously it's going to be player dependent. It's going to be situation dependent. And that's why all these things are always a mix or whatever. And, just for fun, once in a while, it's okay to put in a 4-bet with these kind of hands too, pre-flop, especially if you feel like this is the type of player who does a lot of 3-betting in position. Go ahead and put in a 4-bet pre-flop. You still have that same type of equity, right? The only problem is it's no fun getting 5-bet off of a hand like ace-9 suited, which would have had a lot of equity.
Sure.
But that doesn't happen that often. I mean, when they 5-bet, they have it. They have aces and kings nowadays. These pre-flop raising wars are kind of a thing of the past. So that's the first thing that I've been doing lately that is helping me kind of stay out of trouble in these situations. Go ahead and flop a 9, right? Let's do 9-5 deuce. you have ace nine suited. We can check call 3 times for all I care, because a lot of our opponents are just going to see that initial check. They'll see it as a refusal to c-bet, which they will assume means that we are capping our range. But little do they know we're not.
Yeah, and their pre-flop call there sort of capped their range as well. We're not expecting 10s plus. So odds are our ace 9 is good there.
Right. I mean, there are some bad runouts, obviously, like if it really straightens up or a whole bunch of cards you don't like come. Then if you want to fold some rivers, you can. It's not going to be that exploitable. But, yeah, I mean, as all of our listeners know, as obsessed as I've become with GTO Wizard, I'm still basically an exploitative player at heart. So I would kind of make this depend less on, what time my digital watch is showing and more just what I think this particular opponent's tendencies are. Now, I know that you're mostly playing in, smaller buy-in tournaments, 1Ks and below, and so you're not likely to run into a David Peters or a Dominic Nietzsche or anybody like that. So they will be making a lot of mistakes, and so I still think we should be mostly looking to exploit those mistakes in general. But I do think that knowing what the wizard wants us to do is important. But I've been telling the people that I've been coaching this a lot too. Just because the solver gives you a certain range, that doesn't mean you have to follow that range, because especially pre-flop, the solver is able to play a lot of hands pre-flop because the solver is not going to make any mistakes later in the hand, right? An example might be king 9 suited. At a lot of stack depths, even at a full table, GTO Wizard has us opening king 9 suited under the gun, right? But I'm certainly not doing that because I'm not good enough to play that hand well on all streets against, the type of opponents that I typically face.
Right.
So you can feel free to make your own ranges, but it is good to be able to check lines versus a solver and just see, are we making any huge errors? Are there any major EV mistakes that we're making? But, taking a few hands out of your early position, raising range is probably not going to cost you much in the long run at all.
I do like that checking to the flatter. We always think about if we're the pre-flop aggressor that we need to be continuation betting the majority of the time. But I do like that kind of shifting the approach a little bit. I've done some work with Fitzgerald and Andrew Brokus, and they're always the exploitative versus more perfect play battle between those two. So I'm interested in kind of seeing what their feedback on that would be as well. But I love that line. That's not one I'd considered.
Yeah, and I think that especially if you do it with full range, right, then your check on the flop doesn't really mean anything to that player who's in position. Now, the c-bet frequency from in position is much, much higher. So in other words, if we open with ace 9 suited and get called by the player in the big blind, then yeah, go ahead and do your normal c-betting range. I'm talking specifically when you end up heads up out of position against a flatter. The wizard has us really reducing our c-bet frequency. So I'm not saying never, ever, ever, but if you did go to 0 on your c-bet frequency in these situations, I promise you'll be doing just fine.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, so that helps you. It does a lot of things. And if he checks back, then we automatically have pot control, right? Which is usually a good thing when you have ace 9. Unless, of course, you flop the nuts or something, then you kind of want to not control the pot size because you're just trying to get all the chips in. But typically, you're going to flop a 9 or an ace, and you're better off checking and figuring out what to do from there than betting, and now you have to figure out what to do on the turn when he calls your flop bet.
Yeah.
Right? That's really the problem with c-betting in these spots because you don't know what he has. And now if you check and he bets, if you call every time, you're being exploited because he's going to have you beat too much. And if you fold every time, you're getting exploited because you're getting bluffed too much. So that's why it is a mix from a theoretical standpoint. But I think that starting with check is going to really help you in these spots going forward.
Okay. I like that.
All right, cool. So let's talk about one of your hands. What's it from, and when did you play it? And let's hear all about it.
So this hand that I'm talking about is actually from our most recent circuit event. That was out in Cherokee. This is a $1,100 buy-in. We had 556 entries, and so there was 103K up top. So pretty significant tournament.
Yeah.
In this particular case, I had actually finished out day one as the chip leader, so I bagged. There was a split day one, so day 1A, day 1B, and I played day 1B, and I bagged the chip lead going into day 1B. Coming off the second place finish WSOP, coming off the ring win, high and mighty, feeling like I've got this one in the bag. Of course, it's going to be my next big score. And so I come in the day, sit down at the first table and look around, and as often happens, we're now down to 10% of the field. So there's 55 players left in this tournament where we started with the 556.
Okay, let me ask you something real quick here. Let me jump in. I have a question I have to ask.
Sure.
How did you sleep when you bagged the chip lead on 1B? Like, are you able to just finish up that day and be like, well, I got to get some rest for tomorrow and go right to the snooze, or are you just keyed up and really excited to come back the next day?
So I have a three-pronged approach.
Okay.
One approach is melatonin is your friend.
Nice.
So always trying to get that regulation, try to make yourself get good sleep. We didn't bag until 2 a.m. Restart was at noon, so we had about 10 hours, and so being able to get to sleep quickly and having good sleep is important. That's number one. Number two, I did mention that I have the Primed Mind primers, and I actually did a quick 5-minute call with Adrian to kind of try to reset myself. And then the third thing is I try to practice gratefulness. I'm a man of faith. I believe that everything happens for a reason, and that I'm very thankful for what I have. I'm vertical, I'm healthy, and I have a family who loves me. So spending a few moments just talking to my wife, making sure I FaceTime my kids in the morning, remembering why I do what I do, a lot of that tries to help resettle me. But that being said, of course you get excited. I'm on this heater, and I want the heater to continue, and you have dreams of being the next Daniel Weinman or whoever else. And trying to feed on that, you don't want to. It's more a fear of losing the lead that you have versus excitement over winning. It's an element of fear that I find in my personal game, which is going to lead into this next hand. But that's I tend to sleep a little bit of restless, and so I use a little mix of chemicals and family to try to help me chill out.
I got you. I think that's great, especially the mindfulness and the gratitude piece. I think it's so important, regardless of what religion, if any, a person practices, just approaching life through the lens of I have so much to be thankful for and grateful for. I just think is a healthy way to spend time on earth, So I love that very much. And I don't love melatonin. I've tried it a few times. It actually gives me nightmares, so I don't know what to do about that. I can't go to sleep with a chip lead. It's really hard for me.
You wake up thinking you're on stage without pants?
Exactly. That's a really typical one for us performers,
Yeah.
So, all right. So there's 55 players left.
So 55 players left. This is the first table we're sat at for the day. I actually have some really strong players at this table. Some guys with significant Hendon Mob cash winnings that I'd looked at before. The villain in this hand is sitting in seat 1, and I am in seat 8 of a 9-handed table, so he's 2 to my left. At this point, I have 1.4 million in chips. The average is right about 700,000, so I basically have 2x average. And blinds are 6,000, 12,000, 12,000. So I'm sitting on 120 big blinds or so.
Yes. Right.
So it is checked around to me. I am in cutoff position, and I look down and I have ace jack offsuit.
Okay, so it folds to Brent in the cutoff. He's got a huge stack of chips, especially being on day 2 with anything over 100 big blinds in a $1,000 circuit event, that's a monster stack, right? That's a lot of.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. So what about the stacks on your left? That's going to kind of affect our decision making a little bit, right?
Yeah, so the stack to my immediate left on the button was 230K ish. He had made several comments about, wanting to see ladder up, if you will. So he was playing a little scared and more ICM type considerations. That was the 9 seat. The 1 seat, the gentleman I was talking about, was sitting with 600K ish effective. So he was going to be the villain effective in the stack. And then there were a smattering of others anywhere between that, 300 to 4.5 ish
Right.
opportunity. Yeah.
Right. But they already folded, so we're not worried about that.
Right. Not really worried about any of those. Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see any problem with just making whatever standard open is, 24, 25K. Yeah, nothing fancy here.
Yeah, so and that's exactly what I did. I actually chose the number 28. What I had been finding is the 2x or 2.2x was typically gaining a lot of callers, and then you're finding yourself four-handed, 5-way hands, and so that makes it a little bit more difficult to play. Also, in the times that people were making light calls, I wanted to charge them for that at least initial call pre-flop. So I made it 28, so slightly higher than what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's totally fine. No issues yet. Okay, and we just get called by that player with the 600K stack?
Right, so button folds. I actually get called twice. The button folds. The small blind, who ends up being the villain in the hand, just calls. And then the big blind completes as well.
And what's his stack size?
He has 400-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, he goes away after the flop, so it doesn't really matter, but
Okay,
he was at
so
like
yeah.
400.
He ends up not mattering. All right, so what is that flop?
Okay, so the flop comes out ace, 9, 10, rainbow.
Okay, so ace, 10, 9, rainbow, and we've got, like about almost 100K in the middle, right?
And so, so we made it 28. We got 2 28 callers plus the big blind ante. So we're at 60, 84 plus the other big blind, 84, 96. Yeah, so you're right at 100.
Okay, and so that leaves our small blind with, about a 5.5 SPR. So I don't really want to try to get all in against that big of a stack with just one pair. Although we've got some backdoors, right? We've got ace jack, it's ace, 10, 9, rainbow. I assume they're going to check to us here?
So that's correct. Both the small blind and the big blind check to us.
All right. Well, I'm just going to put in a pretty healthy bet here. I would say about 40,000. So less than half the pot, but I don't think this is a spot for me to do like a 20K or anything like that. I would put in a healthy enough bet. There are plenty of straight draws possible that we want to charge. We definitely want to try to get as much value as we can from worse one pair type of hands. So yeah, I would bet like 40% of the pot.
And that is pretty much what I did. I bet 45, so I bet 9 gray chips.
So far, so good. And so just the small blind calls us.
So just the small blind calls.
Yeah.
And the big blind goes away.
Okay. So now we've got almost 200,000 in the middle, and our opponent has about 500,000 remaining in his stack. And what's the turn?
The turn is the 8. It's the 8 of spades, and so now it's bringing 2 spades on the board.
Okay. So now we have a top pair with an open-ended straight draw. We also block the nuts, which I think is somewhat important. Yeah, I would say overall that's a great card, right?
Yeah, and for the record, I do have the jack of spades.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, to the extent that we're going to worry about this backdoor flush that's coming, it is nice to have a spade in our hand, of course. So he checks again?
So he checks again.
I don't want to bet this card. That might sound strange because I just said I like the card, and I think it's a good card for us and everything else. I don't want to bet this card, and the reason why is it has to do with that SPR that we started with two opponents. One of them had an SPR of 5.5 or something like that. So I'm really trying to control pots in these situations. The downside of checking here is that when we get there on the river, we're probably not going to bust this guy. He's just got too many chips. We can't get them all. Unless we cooler him, like he's got the bottom end of the straight or something. I don't know. Something like that, of course. We might be able to get all the chips then. But yeah, I don't really think we can get all in unless we improve. We're going to be behind. So I know we have outs and everything, and we probably have enough equity to bet and then even, get it in here on the turn. But I just think we have too many chips for that. And maybe in a cash game that would be fine. But I think as this is a tournament and our mindset needs to be, the most important thing is always going to be chip preservation and survival. And accumulation is part of that, but less important, obviously, because survival is the only thing that pays any money. So, yeah, I want to check behind. What did you do?
Not check behind.
Okay.
So my thought process at the time was, could be a week 8. I felt as though, if it were pocket 10s or pocket 9s, I probably would have gotten the 3-bet up front. So I didn't feel like I was worried about the sets. When the 8 comes out and now I've got the up and down straight draw, I heard in my head, your equity just increased. And also the mantra of when you're the chip leader, use the stack effectively and put max pressure. So I did ask for, to see his stack, and I quickly kind of glanced at his stack, and I estimated that he had approximately 400,000 in chips.
Right.
As we talked about, at this point, we've got the 200 in the pot, and worried about the flush draw, I did not want to give him odds to get there, and so I bet 2/3 pot.
Okay. So do you remember which cards were spades?
The 8 of spades was obviously there. I had the jack of spades, and if my memory serves, it was the 9.
Okay. So the spades that he has for flatting you in the small blind against the chip leader, what do you think are his spade or 2 spade combos that we should be concerned with?
So I thought about any ace-x spades. That also would make sense that even with the ace flop, he was willing to continue because he had the backdoor spades. So any suited ace there. He is a suited connector type of guy, so I could see him flatting me with probably 6-7 plus, maybe even some of the higher one gappers, your 8-10, jack 9, those type. So that was sort of, when I'm thinking about the spades, that's sort of the area I'm giving him. Any ace-x spades or upper one gappers, or that kind of 6-7, 7-8 plus.
Right. Okay, I hear you. I hear you, Brent, and I understand your logic here. I just think you're a little bit more worried about this backdoor flush than I am. You have a jack of spades. So knowing that, even if we could put this guy on a flush draw, like 100% he has a flush draw somehow, he's still only, 17% to hit it? So I'm just not that worried about this flush. I'm more concerned about betting and getting check raised and having all this equity, but knowing that I'm probably behind. That's what I'm concerned about, and that's why I don't want to try to get this whole stack in. And I'm afraid that if I bet, I won't be able to get away from my hand. I'm going to end up playing way too big a pot with one pair. So, yeah, I think I still prefer checking behind and maybe not worrying as much about the flush draw as you are?
So as played, I mentioned that I bet 120 into the 200-ish, and our nightmare comes true.
Okay, so he's going to go all in.
He shoves.
Yeah. So yeah, this is tough. I mean, I'm sure at that point you wished that you didn't bet the turn. Your sizing on the turn, I think, is a little bit big. If we bet 40% on the flop, I think it's fine to just bet 40% on the turn again, which does do the job of protecting against the flush draw, right? Because it's only 17% equity we're trying to deny, assuming we're behind and he's drawing to a flush or something. Of course, if he's got like ace X of spades, he can also hit his kicker and get 2-pair and beat you that way, whatever, right? But yeah, I agree with not worrying about a set too much, because I think it's rare that a player would just flat from the small blind with like pocket tens, pocket nines, maybe pocket eights. You can start to see some flats, but generally they like to 3-bet us when we open from late position, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not crazy about this sizing. I feel like you're kind of priced in, pot committed against his stack, right? We've already put in now 28 and then 45 and now 120. I mean, you put in like 40% of his stack already, and you've got top pair and an open ender. Is there any chance he's bluffing?
So as I mentioned, out of the players at this table, he was probably the most accomplished and the most intelligent player, which I took that into consideration. You know, would he be able to float here and make this play? And there was I think probably a 30% chance that he would make this play with absolute air, knowing that I was trying to preserve the chip lead and make my way up. At this point, with my bet, there's 320 in the middle when he shoves. His shove on top is basically giving me 3-1 on the call, right? And I was absolutely torn on what to do. I did take my time. I sweated him. I tried to get him talking. And I know that you often say when you're 50-50 on a decision, you try to use your live reads to push you one way or another. I mean, I've heard you say that plenty of times. And
definitely, yeah.
And so even though he was an intelligent player, I tried to get him to speak to me. He wouldn't really say anything, but he wasn't holding his breath. He was, staring at the middle of the table, but wasn't exactly drilling a hole through it. It was hard for me to really get a live read on him. But in the end, I said, 3-1 on the call. I do have top pair. I do have an open-ended straight draw, so there's plenty of equity there that I, could still draw out even if I am behind. I ended up making the call.
No, I feel like if we're going to bet this much on the turn, we almost have to call. The question is, can we win if we hit an ace? Can we win if we hit a jack? I mean, we're probably behind. I think that your estimate that he would make this play as a bluff about 30% of the time with any two cards, I think I wasn't there. I wasn't at that table. I don't know this guy, and I don't even know how the players in Cherokee generally approach day two situations, but that seems high to me. Given all the disclaimers I just gave, I don't know this guy. I don't know this tournament. I don't know this casino that well. Generally speaking, I think this is going to be a pretty nutty hand a lot of the time, especially given your sizing on the turn. You're not fooling around, Brent. You put in 120,000. So for him to shove over the top of that, I think he's probably going to have, I would say, at least 2-pair a lot. So Anyway, with that said, you're in a terrible spot because, the stacks being what they are, 3-1 is pretty compelling. You only need 25% equity in order to break even on a call, but that doesn't consider the value of preserving your chip lead either, right? So we've got to consider that. It's a tournament situation, not a cash game situation. So I don't like the sizing on the turn for this exact reason. And by the way, listeners, Brent did not send me this hand in advance. No one ever does. So we're just kind of talking through it together. I think that if you bet this much, I guess you kind of have to call. But I don't love it because I'm not sure that you're going to have that much equity regardless. I mean, he could have queen jack, and then you're just drawing to a chop, which is going to be hard to hit. So, I mean, that's the nightmare scenario. But all right, so what's the result?
So that was my consideration as well. Having the jack in my hand, I took that into account as the blocker. Having the jack of spades in my hand, I considered that, potentially being the flush blocker. I did make the call, and you're absolutely right. He turned over queen jack.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's a nightmare because now the best you can hope for is a chop. That's never fun. That's never fun having so much of your stack in, almost half your stack here with, just a chop. So that's, I mean, I guess the rest of the story is not that a miracle queen hit the river and you split the pot, right?
No, the blank hit the river. We did not hit we did not chop the pot. Ended up going from 1.4 million ish to right about 900. Still above average. Still a workable hand. Still a workable stack. But that definitely was a painful hand, and hence the reason why it stuck out in my head, and the reason why I thought I'd bring it to you guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the real inflection point in this hand is the turn. If we don't bet that turn card, and now to me, it all goes to an old book written by three people. One of them is Ed Miller. Another one of them is, I want to say Ruben Mehta, but I might have his first name wrong. I definitely have his last name right, Mehta. And the third author of this book is Mason Malmuth. And this book was, I can't remember the title, but it was the first time I ever heard of SPR. And SPR guides me very often in my post-flop decisions. And it also guides solvers, although it's hard to see sometimes why the solver is checking on the turn so much when we think it's a card they should bet. Sometimes you should look and say, well, is that because if we end up on the river with one pair, should we be happy that this many chips are in the middle? Kind of looking at hands almost backwards, like looking at the end of the hand first, like how much is in the pot first at the end, and then thinking, well, what did I have to get that many chips in there? You had one pair, you had other equity as well, of course. And it's kind of a disaster that he happened to have queen jack.
Yeah, and I think that's where my mistake is thinking, if I felt like I was good on the flop, the increased equity of getting the up and down straight draw, plus having the both spade and jack blocker, my equity, I mean, even solver will show my equity definitely increased.
Oh,
and
for sure,
so
yeah.
I decided to try to protect that equity as well as the potential fold equity, et cetera, and made a huge blunder.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's really a huge blunder, Brent. I don't think we should beat ourselves up. I mean, you had a lot going on here. You had top pair, you were open-ended. I mean, it can't be a huge blunder. It's only really a disaster when he has that hand that, as we mentioned several times, is very hard for him to actually have, right? First, he has to flat from the small blind with queen jack, which not everybody does, right? Then, he's got to somehow have queen jack when you have a jack. So it's just, I don't think it's a huge blunder. I just think you ran into, obviously, the top of his range, the top of anyone's range in the situation. But yeah, one thing I've learned to consider is just when your equity increases, that's one sign that it might make sense for you to bet, right? Or to build the pot, right? Because
Sure.
you know that your equity did increase with that turn card giving you an open ender, of course. Also, another reason why he shouldn't have queen jack is because he didn't check raise on the flop, and a lot of us would. He flopped an open-ended straight draw. So the fact that he just check called the flop is another reason why he shouldn't have queen jack that much. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, just kind of thinking in terms of, do I really want to try to get all these chips in with this hand? And I think that, going for a check back on the turn That way you can have a bluff catcher on the river if you don't improve, or if you do manage to improve, they might be more likely to pay off on the end when they're beat, because people like to call river bets a lot more than they like to call turn bets, just because they know they can just call this one bet and see what you have, and everybody always wants to see what you have.
Yeah, the Alex Fitzgerald satisfied the unknown theory.
Yeah, and obviously you're in a great place, Brent. Your luck has been good lately. You've been playing really well. You're with a great team. Anybody that's connected to Elliott is someone that I would consider worth talking to on a regular basis. Obviously, everybody who's ever listened to this podcast more than once knows how I feel about Andrew Brokos. I mean, I'm the biggest Brokos fanboy in the world. I think he's one of the greatest minds in the poker world, maybe just one of the greatest minds in the world. I love his writing. I love his coaching. I love his teaching. And I think he's a fantastic player. Obviously, Alex Fitzgerald, one of my best friends. Really happy that you're working with him as well. So between that and the fact that you obviously seem to have a good head on your shoulders with your priorities straight, I wouldn't be surprised if you continue to rack up the hardware in the months to come.
No, from your mouth to God's ears, man. I hope so.
Absolutely. All right. Well, before we go, is there anything else you want people to know? Should they find you on Twitter?
Yeah. So on Twitter, I'm at NC Tar Wheel, like North Carolina Tar Heel, but with a W, like a wheel on a car, at NC Tar Wheel. So check me out there. And I do kind of post updates as well as, some individual challenges that I do. So yeah, check me out there and reach out, and hopefully I'll see you guys at some of the stops soon.
I'm so glad that you got in touch, Brent. It's nice to meet you virtually, and I hope that we can, shake hands in person one day soon.
Sounds great, Clayton. Thank you. I appreciate you, man.
So for Brent Lee and for everyone here at Tournament Poker Edge, with special thanks, as always, to our very generous sponsor, ACR Poker, I'm Clayton Fletcher. Thank you so much for listening.
I wanna hold them like they do in Texas Plays. Fold them, let them hit me, raise it, baby, stay with me. Luck and intuition, play the cards with babes to start. And after she's been hooked, I'll play the one that's on her heart. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. I'll get her heart, show her what I got. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Can't read mine, no she can't read a mile. Poker face, she's got to love nobody. Poker face, poker face. Poker face, poker face. I wanna roll with her, a hard pair we will be. While little gambler